Great. Welcome, everyone. I am excited to be here today. My name is Riitho, and we will be discussing some of the key challenges and solutions in automotive trade compliance. So as I said, just a few housekeeping items. There is a chat function and a Q&A box down at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So we will have time for questions and answers at the end of the webinar. So if you do have any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat and we will get to those at the end. So today's session is hosted in collaboration with the American World Trade Chamber of Commerce, AWTCC. So we have Alex here. Welcome, Alex.
Yep, great to join you all today.
So I don't want to steal too much of your intro, Alex, but just to give everyone a bit of background, for those of you who don't know, AWTCC plays a crucial role in facilitating trade by helping companies understand regulatory requirements, issue certificates of origin, and ensure that businesses can operate smoothly across borders. So we are thrilled, Alex, to have you today and to be a partner of yours.
Great, yeah, and happy to join today as well.
So as we all know, the automotive sector is one of the most dynamic and fast evolving industries in global trade. Yet it's facing a growing list of compliance challenges. So from tariffs and sanctions to anti-dumping duties and new export controls, navigating these challenges can be particularly tough for suppliers and importers to make sure that they're meeting all of these regulations. So today, we hope to dive into some of these critical issues, share recent updates, and also do a quick demo on how the Byte platform can simplify some of these compliance workflow challenges. We also have on with us today Michael Ronayne, a former special agent from Homeland Security. So we will start off with Mike providing some industry updates, then have a session with Alex. I'll do the Byte demo, and then we will wrap up with a Q&A. So with that, let's get started, and I will throw it over to Mike.
Thanks, Ann. So as you alluded to, the automobile industry is a highly regulated, dynamic, complex business. There's a lot of potential aspects we could discuss today, but since we're focusing on international trade, I'm going to go over 3 topics related to enforcement. We're going to talk about some general information on regulations and the criminal statutes that apply. We're going to discuss recent policy-related items aimed at protecting U.S. businesses. And then finally, I'm going to talk about a major concern for the Department of Homeland Security, which is the import of counterfeit parts and counterfeit automobile parts finding their way into the U.S. supply chain. Just in terms of my background, and as you said, I was a special agent with the U.S. Department of Homeland Security for more than 20 years. I retired about 3 years ago before joining New Borders, and I was the assistant special agent in charge for global trade investigations in Boston. When we think of automobiles, one of the things that DHS, often investigated were high-end vehicles that were stolen off the streets and then just subsequently packed into shipping containers and sent overseas. And I guess we don't often think of an automobile as a commodity to generate revenue for transnational criminal organizations, but that was something that we saw quite often. In terms of general rules, as with any import or export of merchandise into or out of the United States, many rules and regulations obviously apply. I'm going to talk about the regs for a second, then talk a little bit about the criminal statutes. And when we're talking about exports of vehicles, they're not necessarily controlled themselves, sort of like sensitive technology that maybe, a fighter jet part or something like that. But it is a commodity leaving the United States. So in general, in terms of the exports, if you're interested in the export regs for automobiles, Title 19 in the Code of Federal Regulations under Part 192 sets forth the regs for lawful export of a vehicle. And Title 49 of the CFR Part 591 covers the permanent importation of motor vehicles and motor vehicle equipment. So in terms of export of vehicle, really some of the most basic requirements are presenting the vehicle to include the VIN number to CBP or U.S. Customs and Border Protection 72 hours prior to the export. And failure to follow these regs can lead to penalties up to $10,000. When we're talking about imports, basic requirements, again, documentation must be provided to CBP, but also to the Environmental Protection Agency and the Department of Transportation to ensure that all vehicles that are coming into the country meet the safety and emissions standards. Just very briefly on criminal conduct, as we know, and as you alluded to earlier, and the sanctions are ever increasing. We have to be aware of who we're trading with. Individuals and entities are sanctioned by OFAC, the Department of Commerce, the Department of State. And in the last 2 years, the Russia sanctions obviously have increased greatly, to include some of the Russian auto manufacturers, AutoVAZ, Solers, KAMAZ, to name a few. And then Intelma is another Russian company that was sanctioned by OFAC, and they develop braking systems. So as always, from a U.S. law enforcement perspective, you need to know who you're trading with, and you need to know what restrictions apply. Just a few of the statutes very quickly. The imports, a lot of the import criminal violations deal with paperwork, entry of goods by means of false statements or falsification of records or fraud, among others. And in the exports, there's a general rule. It's 18 U.S.C. 554, which is smuggling goods from the United States. And basically, it's a very broad statute that essentially says that if you export any merchandise contrary to any law or regulation, you have criminal exposure. And these are pretty serious because the penalties for these criminal violations can be up to 20 years in prison and up to $1 million in fines. So next, I'm going to move to some recent increased tariff rates. There was a policy change on electric vehicles based on China's unfair trade practice, which include illicit tech transfers, industrial espionage, and intellectual property violations, including theft. From Congress Section 301 of the Trade Act of 1974, and I'm quoting here, grants the Office of the United States Trade Representative a range.
Whoops.
Let's give him a second.
There we go. Hey, Mike, we lost you
You
there.
back?
Yep.
No worries. So in May of 2024, following review of the tariff actions on Chinese goods, the White House announced a proposal to increase the tariff rate on many products from China, but it also included electric vehicles and electric vehicle batteries. And according to the U.S. Trade Representative, China produces about 70% of the world's electric vehicles. Now, the proposed increase on the tariff for electric vehicles went from 25% to 100%. The tariff rate on the lithium batteries, a critical component, obviously, in the electric vehicles, increased from 7.5 to 25%. That was in May. A few weeks ago, on September 13th, they announced the final modifications on the proposed increases, which became effective on September 27th. So finally, I'm going to cover counterfeit auto parts. And this is a huge concern for DHS. And DHS includes CBP and HSI, my former agency. And a counterfeit auto part is one that has a trademark of an actual legitimate brand, but was produced by another manufacturer. Now, obviously, this creates a major concern for public safety, as there's no way to know how well the parts are made, if there was any oversight, or even what materials were used. So some of the counterfeit parts of serious concern include airbags, brakes, microchips, suspension components, and seatbelts. And when discussing fake parts, it's not only important that the trade community is aware of this, it's also important that the general public and potential consumers are aware of the fact that counterfeit parts exist. So last month, HSI-led IPR Center announced the launch of a campaign called Put the Brakes on Fakes. And in the announcement, it reported that CBP had seized over 211,000 counterfeit automotive parts last year, to include almost 500 counterfeit airbags. Obviously, a serious issue. And HSI has about 40 open criminal investigations involving counterfeit automotive parts. I'm going to just cite a couple examples of actual cases in dealing with counterfeits, just so you can have a little bit of background, a little bit of an idea. In March, the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Western District of Tennessee announced the guilty plea of an auto mechanic to charges of trafficking counterfeit airbags and also causing a dangerous good or forbidden explosive to be placed onto a commercial aircraft. So the airbags use a chemical reaction that produces nitrogen gas to create the inflation. So potentially a serious issue there. Now, the mechanic had previously imported airbag components from China, made the counterfeit bags, and then sold the devices on eBay to unwitting repair shops who thought they were obviously receiving legitimate products. This investigation, which was conducted by HSI, U.S. Postal Service, and Customs and Border Protection, identified that this mechanic had sold over 500 counterfeit airbags. Now, he faces up to 10 years in prison and a fine of up to $2 million. And then just briefly, also in March, the Queens, New York District Attorney's Office announced an individual and multiple corporations were charged in a scheme to trade counterfeit automobile rims for high-end vehicle brands like Mercedes and BMW. Now, this scheme involved purchasing generic rims and then relabeling them with the logos from those legitimate vehicle manufacturers. The defendant in this case was charged with multiple counts of trademark counterfeiting and money laundering, is facing up to 15 years if convicted. So I'll wrap it up there. And this is clearly a serious issue and one that clearly directly impacts public safety.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, that was great and super informative. And I think just gave a really good overview of issues that the automotive industry is facing or are facing. And I know, Alex, you have just so much kind of direct contact with, who all of these regulations are affecting. And you have, another kind of line of insight into these changing regulations and kind of the current industry trends and patterns. So I would love to hear from you on that as well.
Yeah, so just to kind of reiterate, I'm with the American World Trade Chamber of Commerce, which we abbreviate AWTCC. And we're focused on essentially US exporters, representing their needs as well as helping them get their documentation flow in order, and more specifically, helping them get through customs. I could go through all of our qualifications, all that space, but I think that would probably be less useful. But of course, you can look up us if you're interested in more information. But primarily just know that we're often on the ground level. So we're helping an individual compliance office or an individual documentation team get a specific shipment through customs. That's either been detained, it's been delayed, or customs is asking for additional paperwork that they're not necessarily used to seeing. We also do a lot of work on documentation verification. So just because of the space that we fit and the collaboration we have with the International Chamber of Commerce, it's led to a lot of customs officials outside of the United States coming to us to ask, is this real, right? Is this a genuine document? And I would say disproportionately, we are getting requests for that around automobiles specifically. So that probably won't come as a surprise, especially as Mike mentioned earlier, we are seeing a lot of trade in stolen vehicles. And unfortunately right now, it's become easier and easier to potentially get convincing fake documents in order to try and clear customs in the country of import. We're starting to see some pushback on that. We're starting to see customs around the world actually get, I'd say, up to date with where the scammers and fraudsters and thieves and everything else with where they are. But I think it is an evolving process, right? And so there is that kind of cat and mouse game. And so some of the tricks that they typically use to try and get through customs may not be working as well. We're also seeing other companies maybe on the ground level, maybe not on a manufacturer level, right? We're not seeing like a brand name manufacturer, but we're seeing a lot of companies lower down on the totem pole. So it could be an individual dealership or just a used car lot that's reselling vehicles, and they could be legitimately reselling them. This isn't something that's stolen or anything like that. But what we're often seeing is companies kind of getting in over their head, right? I think right now there's an ever-evolving list of who not to ship to, right? Who's on a restricted list. And it really does come down to the individual to make sure that they're doing everything correct, right? And so they need to make sure that they are shipping to a real company or a real person. They need to make sure that it's not someone on any kind of restricted party list. And I think we're oftentimes seeing companies shortchange there, right? Where customs has detained something because it went into Uzbekistan and they cannot actually authenticate who this person is that's supposed to be getting the vehicle in the first place, right? And so we've seen cases like that happen where they essentially, the dealerships come to us very late in the process to see what they can do, and unfortunately we just have to tell them, you should have done your due diligence ahead of time, right? That essentially that's going to be something that's going to burn you. I think this is going to impact manufacturers as well, and we have seen that happen as well. So even if, say, the head office for a major manufacturer is doing everything above board and doing everything correctly, if companies downstream are doing things incorrectly, so if it is dealerships or if it is just resellers that are selling overseas to companies they shouldn't be, or using potentially documents they shouldn't be using and things like that, what's going to end up happening, what we've seen happen, is the actual customs officials choose to kind of selectively enforce rules that haven't been enforced in the past. So we're seeing a lot of businesses come to us and say, I've never needed a certificate of origin stamped. Why on earth are they requesting this for this country? I've never needed embassy legalization. I have no idea what that even is. I've never heard of that before. And they're coming to us with these kind of complaints to say, why is this all of a sudden coming out, right? And it's not because of some new individual rule, typically. It's not some new policy that customs in Lithuania is putting in place. It's because someone shipped something into the country that faked US origin and was a Russian manufactured vehicle, but they pretended it was something else. And now Lithuanian customs, they're going to crack down on everything coming through for the next month to try and make sure they're putting extra scrutiny there. And I think that kind of dynamic process is challenging for a lot of exporters, just across the board, but I do think it disproportionately hurts the automobile industry. So it's important to have a dynamic process there to be able to be a little bit flexible, but just to know when all of a sudden you start hearing about requirements or certain things that are needed for customs to actually legitimize the shipment and legitimize your business, you're not necessarily alone in that process. We get a lot, I'll mention, this is outside of automobiles specifically, but we get a lot of fraudulent registrations to us directly, companies trying to get official documentation, official stamp certificates of origin. And we're confident in our process to vet businesses and catch them ahead of that process before we could issue them anything. But some of them are pretty convincing, right? They'll have convincing websites, they'll have LinkedIn account with a good follower count, right? All of that stuff is so easy to fake today. And so it's not just important for the fact that customs is going to be more likely to scrutinize things because they have a harder time really legitimizing your business. It's also the case you have to be careful about who you're selling to as well. It's really easy to make a convincing Uzbek company that's going to be a dealership, but when you really start digging into it, it's not going to make a lot of sense. And I think as well there's some difficulty on the US side. So I might mention, Mike mentioned a lot of the counterfeit products as well and a lot of the fakes out there. The US government does have a Stop Fakes initiative with a pretty good team behind it that I've gotten to speak to before, but it is a team without an enforcement capability, right? So that's really, I think, the challenge that we're probably having in the US is that there are avenues to pursue this, but it's really disjointed potentially in order to make sure that everything's genuine. I think as well there's probably some familiarity with what might be on the radar for companies, right? We're looking at potential new EU regulations around to incentivize electric vehicles. We're looking at, of course, at what could be more and more complications with Chinese tariffs as well, right? We don't necessarily know what that's going to look like over the next couple of years as well. But I think probably the biggest driver and probably the biggest headaches I'm seeing when I'm working with compliance teams, especially in automotive, is around bad actors essentially making things harder for everyone in that process. Those are, I think, the big things that I'd want to highlight. I will mention one more thing, actually, which is on my notes at least. There's a clear push for verification for documents as well. That's one of the things I'm seeing as a really major trend, is that just handing in a piece of paper with oftentimes I've seen literally pen against paper to make official documents still, as opposed to going through a digital process to make everything consistent, make everything easily auditable as well and easily verifiable. The US, I think, is uniquely behind in that space. When you look at exporters in China, it is 100% digital, right? You have to do everything digital. Everything is issued to them digitally by the federal government as well. There's no paper process. There's no paper signatures or forms or anything like that on there. So that's one of the things I think that is a driver. And I think as well, again, a lot of customs offices have been a little bit lax because they know US tends to be behind on things. I still see people shipping vehicles into Europe using a NAFTA certificate, which is a little bit peculiar. And for whatever reason, it never came up as a problem. European customs just knew to kind of put up and tolerate how the US did stuff, but they're kind of finally choosing to enforce certain things and make sure that we over in the States are actually doing things sensibly, I'd say. Yeah, that would be it from my side. I appreciate the time.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. I mean, you just have such amazing insight into like the actual challenges being faced by these exporters. And it sounds like, you know, even as much as you can follow the regulations, you can follow the changing policies. But if stuff wasn't being enforced before and now it is, and it's at such an individual level, that must just be so challenging for people to try to keep up with.
Yeah, and I think the frustration often is very often you're working with an individual when you're trying to get something into a country, especially if you're going into some of the more difficult areas of the world as well. You're going to be working with a person as opposed to, you know, a universally applied set of norms and rules.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for that insight. And I think, you know, just for anyone who is listening, it sounds like, Alex, you guys are the people to go to. So if challenges do come up, you know, just a little plug for AWTCC, make sure you're, you know, headed over there and getting the assistance that you need. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and just share my screen and give a quick overview of the Byte platform. So let me get that up. So just from our website, I'm going to log in. And the Byte platform is a screening platform that allows you to screen people and commodities. So as Alex alluded to, you know, there's an ever-growing list, and Mike also, there's an ever-growing list of people and companies that you can't do business with. And one thing that we didn't really touch on very much, but also just on the import side, the concept of forced labor and forced labor in the automotive supply chain. That's a whole nother issue, you know, that we haven't gotten into too much, but there are a lot of screening tools out there now, but Byte is designed to be very user-friendly and a quick screening tool that allows you to, as I said, screen people and companies and products. So just quickly to explore some of the key features in Byte, I'll use a few just real-world use cases. So on the import side, if you are importing a product, you can come over to the products tab here, and you can put in either the product name or an HS code. So you can search both of them. So I'm just going to put in my product code there. And you can also apply specific lenses. So in this case, you know, I know that I'm doing an import, so I'm really interested in ADCVD, China 301 tariffs, forced labor, PGA codes. So we can select those lenses, and then they pull from quite a few lists over here on the right. We can see all of those. Just hit apply, and then I can see my results here. So here I can see I might have some further paperwork that I need to submit for the PGAs as a PGA flag. And then it's also hitting on that Section 301 tariff. So as we discussed, those were just updated. So again, just some additional due diligence and making sure that all of the paperwork and everything you need to be fully compliant, you can do. And then similarly, on this import, let's say I am importing from German company, And we can see quite a few results here. So again, I'm just going to use my lens to filter down those results. In this case, I'm most worried about forced labor, transshippers, and restricted parties. So that's what I'm really worried about. So this is going to run against a number of different forced labor lists, any debarment list in the US, and we'll go ahead and click OK. And we can see we have 4 results here. Most notably, because I know what I'm importing, this company here is tied to forced labor. So again, just some additional due diligence there into kind of what's in my supply chain, where it's coming from. Not to say, we can't do this import, but just kind of that flag that this may be high risk and I should do a little bit further research. Similarly, on the export side, going through a similar process again, just using my same HS code. But in this case, I can apply a lens that's more focused on my exports. So controlled or licensable commodities. I don't think it's not a high priority battlefield item, but who knows? And then Russia controls. And again, go ahead and apply that. And again, I can begin to see kind of what hits I'm getting here. So in this case, this is hitting on the Russian industry sector sanctions list, supplement number 4. In this case, I'm an exporter. I'm not exporting directly to Russia, so I might, just dismiss that. I'm not sending this to Russia, so I'm going to go ahead with my transaction. And now, Alex, as you said, kind of screening that entity is so important too. So I'm going to screen the company that I'm shipping to, and I'm shipping to a company in China, Great Wall Motor Company. And again, just applying my lens there. I really just care about US restricted parties, transshippers. And we can see quite a few results for Great Wall Motor Company. And when I open up the entity, I can scroll down and see the investigative notes. So in this case, this company was seen, this is a high-risk company. They were seen shipping commodities to Russia potentially in violation of Russian industry sector sanctions supplement number 2 and supplement number 4. And if you remember, my HS code was on that supplement number 4 list. So again, this was just a transaction that maybe I would do a little bit further due diligence into who I'm selling to, who they would potentially be selling to, and kind of looking at my customer and where they would be selling beyond that. So these are kind of just 2 pretty blatant screening examples of how the screening module in Byte can be used. And to your point, Alex, just on every transaction, who are we shipping to, and running those names here. In Byte, you can also do bulk searches. So if you have a long list of transactions, let's say you're shipping 20 cars, you can enter all of that in at once in a CSV and run that through and run it against the same data and get the same hits. There's also the Byte GPT module. This allows you to interact. I tell people I typically use it to kind of confirm what I've already found. So you can ask it, to run the same information that you've just looked at, see if it finds anything or sees anything that you didn't see, and just kind of confirm your findings. And then what I typically do is save the output of that into my vault. So again, we have a workflow tool that allows users to save their searches. So in this case, just going back to my import example, I had created a ticket here. I have my invoice saved in the ticket for future audit purposes, and I can put any additional comments in. And then I also have my commodity information in there as well. So just kind of that paperless audit trail to keep track of your due diligence efforts. Your bulk screening can also be saved. So if you do run a bulk screen, you can then revisit those search results, you can see what you put in, and then also the hits that returned on that bulk screening. So you have that. If someone does come asking, what due diligence did you do on this transaction, that is available for you in the app. So that's just a quick example of how Byte addresses screening. And as I mentioned at the beginning, it is designed to make compliance processes quick, efficient, reliable, repeatable. So whether you're screening for products, import flags, or ensuring that your export partners are compliant, Byte is a tool that can help you navigate kind of these complex regulations. So happy, as always, to answer any questions on Byte. But with that, Mike or Alex, do you have any final comments or questions before we move into the Q&A session?
Nothing additional from me, Ann. Thank you.
I'm good. Yeah.
Okay. So let me just head over to our Q&A and see if there are any open questions there or in the chat. All right. I'm not seeing any chat questions or Q&A questions at the moment. So I will talk slowly in case people have a minute that they want to enter it in. But I think with that, I will start to wrap things up. So thank you all for joining the webinar today. I hope you found it insightful. I can speak from the Byte team. Both Mike and I are happy to follow up and answer any questions directly. Alex, I'll throw you in there too.
Yeah, you can contact through our website. And naturally, the Byte team, I'm sure, will help facilitate any kind of questions or connection you're looking for there.
Definitely. Thank you. So just a brief summary. As we've seen and discussed today, trade compliance is becoming increasingly complex, both imports and exports. As I said, we didn't even touch on the forced labor aspect. With the right tools and right people and right systems, there are ways to navigate these challenges and more confidently ensure that your products and partners are compliant. So if you have any more questions or would like a personalized walkthrough of the Byte platform, please don't hesitate to reach out. We are here to help you simplify. And again, Alex, thank you so much for joining us, and to the whole AWTCC team. We greatly value your partnership, and we would love to have you on again sometime.
Oh yeah, certainly we will be, yeah.
Great. So with that, I'll say thank you one more time and have a great day, everyone.
Mm-hmm.